Hi everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. So we're currently doing the daily video series that I do. I try and do every shopping trip, but I don't always manage it. So we do 6 to 8 weekly shopping, and then I try and do daily videos once I get back to show how I use each of those items that I buy and make them last the full 6 to 8 weeks, whether it's freezing them, cooking them, meal prepping them, canning them, whatever it is. So it's one of the major questions that I get asked when I talk about doing groceries this often is how do we make it last that 6 to 8 weeks? So these series are always well received. I've gained a lot of new viewers doing them, which is really great. YouTube is obviously appreciating them as well, so consistency is key a little bit with YouTube. So welcome to everyone, and enjoy what you get to see. So there'll still be a few more days today and a couple more. I might take Saturday off because I'm going to do a Q&A video Sunday, but I might end up having to have 2 parts to it from the questions that I've got, so we'll see how we go or how long I make that one or whatever else, but I could do with a bit of a break. So today's video is, what did we do today? We made a rustic apple tart, making the pie crust using some of that lard that I rendered, and what else did we do? I can't remember off the top of my head, but I will have a look at my notes and I will do the voiceover and I will show you what we got done today. So I think this is day, say 8. So come along, see what we got done, and enjoy. So first thing I needed to do was to get the vegetable soup jars that I had already processed cleaned and put away. So you have to leave your jars for 24 hours on the bench, so they've been the next day, or you have to leave it overnight. The next day I wash the jars down with a bit of warm soapy water and take the clips off, check the seals, make sure that everything's sealed up, and label them and get them on the pantry shelves. So that's the first thing I do of morning, so that I can clear my bench somewhat and have some room to do everything else that needs doing on the bench. We are trying to get through all the meat that is coming close to date now after being this long from the shopping trip, so we had to get the chicken thighs done. I had 3 trays of chicken thighs left. We had used one throughout the last week in various things, so we had 3 left. I got Darryl to slice them all up for me. I like to slice the thighs into thin strips just because it's easier for cooking, easier for freezing, easier for using for a lot of things. You don't have to worry about not cooking it all the way through when it's in strips, generally speaking. So he sliced them all up for me and put them in a big bowl. I like to marinate my thighs. I think that that's the best way to have them, personally. We eat them in lots and lots of ways, and you will see a whole lot of those ways throughout the next, couple of weeks of video. But they're not generally used as a... I like them marinated. I find it easy to have it pre-cooked and marinated in the freezer. If you freeze things like this raw, you have to remember to pull them out, to defrost them, to use them in meals. I just find it much easier to have them pre-marinated, frozen in the freezer. So we marinated it with what we normally do. We use cowboy candy, some lemon juice, smoked paprika, garlic powder, salt and pepper, onion powder, some mustard powder, bit of olive oil, that sort of thing. I do have ratios somewhere, and I have given them to you guys before, but for a big bowl like this, I did it by eye. You want some good color on the chicken, and I have done it enough that I kind of just knew what needed to be done. So we marinated that. We cooked it all off, so I like to marinate it and leave it for the day or not, it just depends on how timing is going, and I like to cook it all off. So actually Darryl cooked it off in batches for me while I went inside and got some typing done. So he cooked it off in batches in the cast iron so that it was all cooked, and then we could stick it in the fridge. We got another couple of days of it being okay in the fridge that way, and then we can bag it up. I shredded some more cabbage in the Thermomix cutter because we have plenty of cabbage at the moment that I haven't done anything with yet, and the Thermomix cutter makes shredding it so very, very easy. I am thrilled with the way cabbage comes out through that. So I shredded half a cabbage in the Thermomix cutter as well. Next thing I needed to do was make some pastry because I'm going to use up those apples. So the apples that I had stewed a few days ago, I still haven't done anything with, so that they needed used up. So I decided to make some pie crust now that I've got the lard made as well. So I do a pie crust with 400 grams of plain flour. I use 60 grams of olive oil and 60 grams of lard, and then 110 grams of ice water and a pinch of salt. You can add a bit of sugar if it's a sweet pastry, but I don't generally. Savoury works fine because what you're putting in the pie is sweet anyway. So I bring it together in the Thermomix or in a food processor if that's what you've got. Bring it together till it's in the little balls, and then I pour it out onto the dough mat so that I can bring it all together into a ball to go into the refrigerator. Realistically, I should split this into two, because if you refrigerate it in a nice disc shape, it makes it easier to roll out. The dough also was a little dry. I'm not entirely sure why, but it was. So I added a little more ice water when I was working the dough, and it worked fine, but it was a little dry for some reason. So I made that, I put it in a ball and got it in the fridge for using later. You always want to refrigerate it for a little while just to let those fats harden back up a bit. Then I made a new batch of mayo. So my mayo I use with stick blender. There is a whole video about how I do it with stick blender, and I mostly do it the same way still. I use 3 or 4 egg yolks, depending on whether they are duck eggs or chicken eggs. I use some lemon juice, some mustard. This is homemade fermented mustard. I'm using garlic that I fermented in honey in this particular one, or I use some cowboy candy, something with a hint of sweet. And then the oil added slowly, emulsified and blended until it hits the right consistency. So it will be thin and thin and thin, and then it will be thick. And then if you want it thinned out a little bit more, you can add a bit more oil and go a little bit thinner again towards the other side of the mayo, depending on what you're using it for. We like it thin for things like pizza, and thicker for like spreading on sandwiches and stuff. Now, we are relying on flatbreads again, so you can see that it is a very heavily relied on meal in summer when we have a whole lot going on. So because it's so simple to mix up the dough for the flatbreads, and realistically it's no different than everyone having sandwiches every day, but it feels decadent to us because we don't generally have bread every day, but anyway. So I did another batch of the flatbreads because we have all that chicken that we just cooked up. So we have the half a cabbage that I added mayo to make coleslaw, and then we had the chicken that I had just cooked up, so we sliced that up nicely and then had it with the flatbreads. So we served the kids up just a plate of flatbreads. They have a couple each with the coleslaw or tomatoes or mayo or whatever they want with it, and the chicken. There's ham as well and other salad bits and pieces, whatever they desire to eat with it. And they had that for lunch, and Darryl and I had the same thing. The rest of the chicken, as I said, will be vacuum sealed up into servings. I normally serve it in 300 gram and 600 gram lots, so that I've got 2 different sizes depending on what I'm doing with it, whether it's going into a pasta or into a stir fry or whatever else. And we vacuum seal it up and put it in the freezer, and then that way whenever I want it I can just pull it out, and once it's defrosted it is edible straight out of the bag and can be used in any way that we want. We do generally reheat it because it's just nice when it's heated up, but it is edible cold. I decided to make some focaccia up because we haven't done sourdough for a little while, because it's just, you need fridge room and stuff when you're doing sourdough, so we haven't done it for a while. So focaccia is a little bit more hands-on, or the one that I make is a little bit more hands-on. There is an entire video on how I make it if you were interested. So it's a good one to make when I'm already going to be in the kitchen, because I can do what I need to do with it while I'm doing other things. So I mix it up into a shaggy dough first. I like this lovely wide bowl that I think was thrifted somewhere, and I have a couple of them and I love them. And I just mix up the shaggy dough. The focaccia has a bit of honey in it, or sugar, a little bit of oil, the starter, water, salt, and flour. Very basic, just in the ratios that make a nice focaccia. So I mix all that up into a shaggy dough and put it aside with a shower cap on it just to wait until I come back to it. So I have those apples that I stewed up the other day that I haven't used, and that's what I'm going to use with these pie crusts. But I couldn't be bothered making an actual pie. A lot of effort and a lot of pastry when you're making a top and a bottom, or I could use puff pastry. It's all just too much of it. I was going to just make some pasties with some apple turnover type things with some puff pastry, but then I had the lard, so I thought I'll make some normal pastry and we'll just make a rustic apple tart. So all I did was I pulled the pastry out, rolled it into a circle a good size circle. Doesn't have to be particularly neat. I sort of mush the edges in to make it circular, but in this sort of a dish it doesn't matter if it's a little unevenly shaped or a little unevenly thickness or whatever else. So I rolled it out into a circle of sorts, and then you fill the middle with a pile of the whatever your filling is. Now I use the apples from the top that are quite dry, so I could put a fair whack of them in there because they're not going to seep everywhere. If you're using them freshly stewed, you're going to have to use less because they're gonna weep a little bit. But because these have been in the fridge, the apples are quite dry, so I could use a nice heaping pile of them. And then you just fold the edges of the dough up over your filling, whatever your filling is. So this yeast can be savoury, they can be sweet. There's a myriad of things that you can put in these rustic tarts. I'll have to make some more of them, I think, because everyone really enjoyed it. Everyone loves things wrapped in pastry. And I couldn't make pastry for a long time. Pie crusts, pastries, whatever you want to call it. For a long time, short crust pastry was not really my thing. And now that I've found this ratio that I like and that works, it is wonderful. It holds together. You can pick up the pie pieces, but it's still short enough that it's melt in the mouth, but not so short that it breaks, and I'm really happy with it. So you fold the edges of the pie crust up over the apple. You can use so I put it on baking paper because it's hard to move once it's full, because it's quite heavy, it's quite well filled. So I use the baking paper to help fold the edges of the pie crust up over the apple. You're going to want to have folds in it so that it overlaps itself, so that you're creating a bit of a seal of a bowl to hold your filling into your pie crust. So you just go all the way around and fold it and pleat it, I suppose. It's sort of pleating it all the way around the filling so that it has walls to hold the filling inside. And then I brushed it with some ghee, so you could use a bit of egg yolk mixed up if you really wanted to, but I used a little bit of ghee. And then I still have this coconut sugar that I got from Naturally Sweet. They gifted it to me, and we love coconut sugar, but it's very expensive, so I don't have it very often. So I tend to hold on to it and use it in things that the flavour really comes through in, because it's got a lovely sort of I want to say like a malty flavour. So I sprinkled the outside edge of the crust with that sugar, because remember, I didn't put any sugar in the pie crust, so I thought that putting that little sprinkle of sugar that will brown on the outside of the pie crust will be really nice. I could have put some in the pie crust. I didn't think about it at the time. I didn't think about the fact that I was making something sweet with it, but regardless, I sprinkled it with the coconut sugar, which was really tasty because it crystallized up when it's cooking, and it's really nice. So after that, I did the first stretch and fold with focaccia dough. So the first time you do it, it just looks sloppy. So all you're trying to do is bring all the outside edges of the dough into the middle and making sure that it's mixing through. And the first time, there's not much structure to it. There never is with the dough, but every time you come back to it, there's a little bit more structure. So I do this about every half an hour. I don't think I filmed all of them, but about every half an hour, I come in and I coil fold or stretch and fold, depending on how the dough is reacting, to create that strength in the dough before it goes in the fridge. For dinner that night, we had the couple of jars of the pork stew that didn't seal. So I had 2 jars of that pork stew that didn't seal properly, that I stuck in the fridge, that need to be eaten within a couple of days, like any leftovers put in a fridge. So I heated them up. I also had a container with some stock left in it from the chicken stock that I made the other day. So I added that to it as well, because normally I would add some stock to my soups as well, because the kids really like pasta in their soup. So I added a bag of the macaroni elbow type things, the curly macaronis, the hollow little macaroni noodles, to the soup, because that is their preferred pasta to have with soup. And I brought the soup up to a boil, added the pasta, boiled the pasta in the soup. So that thickens the soup up really nicely. It ends up with the starch from the pasta thickens the soup up really nicely. It's got all those veggies, it's got the pork, the tomato, and the pasta in it. If I had bread, I'd serve them with a little bit of bread. Didn't have bread, but there's plenty of carbs in the soup anyway, and they were happy with that. So they ate that big pot of soup for dinner. We had the apple tarts for dessert. So I have some little jars of apple scrap syrup that I made so for anyone who was around they'll remember, but people who are new, I managed to get 180 kilos of Pink Lady apples in season in a pallet's worth for $90, which was super cheap. Like, that's not super cheap for apples, but these were absolutely gorgeous in season Pink Lady apples. They were amazing, and I made so many jars of apples, apple butter, stewed apples, apple pie filling. I turn a lot of the apple butter into apple butter barbecue, so every time we run out I open a couple of jars of the apple butter and turn it into apple butter barbecue, because the kids adore apple butter barbecue and it's super tasty. We've adapted the recipe to have not quite so much sugar in it, because the original recipe had a lot of sugar, but we have adapted the recipe to how we like, and I make apple butter barbecue quite regularly. So I have all these jars of apple butter and I turn them into a variety of things. I do use them in baked oatmeals and stuff as well, but anyway, that was a little bit of a squirrel. So when I got all those apples, I peeled some of them for some of what I was doing, and I turned the cores and the peels into apple scrap syrup. So I used my steam juicer to get apple juice out of some of them, and the rest I put in with sugar and water in a pot. There is videos on it, and made apple scrap syrup, which is basically like a sugar syrup that tastes like apples, I suppose. And so I have a few jars of that on the shelf. I keep on forgetting it's there. I haven't been buying maple syrup lately because maple syrup is just so expensive. So what I need to do is start pulling those little jars of apple scrap syrup out instead. And I have done it a couple of times in the last week once I remember that they were there. So anyway, because the apple pie didn't have a whole lot, the tart thing didn't have a whole lot of juice in the apples, I used a lot of the dry apples. I just drizzled that apple scrap syrup over the top of the pie before I served it. Just give it that little bit of sticky sweet flavour, which was really, really nice. So the tart was super good. The kids ate them all, ate it all, and we ate it all. It was delicious. I will definitely be making that one again. And I do have plenty of jars of apples on my shelf as well, so I probably need to go through some of them too before the next apple season, which is in autumn normally, so we've got a few months. After that, before going to bed, I did the last coil fold for the evening for the dough. So as you can see, the strength of the dough has really improved over the afternoon of working with it, and it does a really lovely coil fold and has this really nice puffiness to it before it goes in the fridge. So sometimes I would put it in the fridge for a few hours and then I'd pull it out and put it into the baking tray and let it rise in the baking tray overnight. But we're having a lot of problems with bush rats at the moment, and they're chewing through anything and everything that's food related that's left anywhere. So leaving it on the bench or anywhere is not ideal at the moment. I do have a whole bunch of resources ready to go to make up a bit like a meat safe, but it's going to be wooden shelving and stuff for me to be able to store things that need to cool away from insects and flies, but also things that could be overnight. We've bought some aluminium fly screening and stuff to cover it so that I'm not going to have that problem, but we haven't got to it yet. So I ended up just putting it in the fridge and leaving it in the fridge overnight, and then you'll see in tomorrow's video I put it in the baking tray and let it rise during the day, which is not ideal because normally if it rises overnight I bake it first thing in the morning and we have it for morning tea, lunch sort of types or breakfast. But it wasn't ready until later in the afternoon because it took the time to do the last proof on the bench, but it worked fine. So the last coil fold for the day though shows the way that the dough has changed its texture throughout the day by me working it, which is what it's a hands-on dough, but it's really worthwhile. If you have a look at the video that shows the whole process, I comment about how I'm not super keen on doughs that require that much hands-on time, but it makes such a lovely loaf, and that loaf can be used for so many things. Like, it's really nice just dipped in some olive oil and flavored olive oil, or in some dukkha, or sliced in half and used as sandwiches, or with soup. It's just a really nice bread. So I spent a little bit more time on it, but I'm okay with doing that. So that was today's food prep and everything else. We're getting to the point where I'm struggling to figure out what I'm doing with everything and where to put it all. and starting to get through the stuff that has been sitting there longer than I would like and things like that. So a couple more days of this sort of prep to go, and then we will be back onto schedule, just sharing what we cook, what we eat. And we'll go back to getting the gardens finished for all our autumn planting and any other off-grid projects that need doing, and updates and things like that of that. So thank you for joining me again, and I will see you on the next video. Bye guys.